Have you ever felt that profound emptiness inside? That hollow sensation at your core that nothing seems to fill, no matter how much success you achieve, how many relationships you cultivate, or how many possessions you accumulate. It's as if something essential is missing. A void that sometimes whispers and sometimes screams that something isn't quite right with your existence. What if I told you that this emptiness, this uncomfortable space you're trying so desperately to escape or fill, isn't a sign that something's wrong with you, but rather the very birthplace of your transformation? Welcome to today's exploration of one of life's most misunderstood experiences, the existential void that precedes rebirth. Over the next 25 minutes, we'll journey through ancient wisdom traditions, modern psychology, and practical insights that reveal how emptiness isn't the enemy, but the womb where your new self is gestating. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the empty spaces in your life aren't failures to be fixed, but rather sacred clearings where something authentic can finally emerge. Whether you're currently navigating a dark night of the soul, or simply sensing that something more meaningful awaits beyond the familiar patterns of your life, what you're about to discover might completely transform how you experience the void within. The nature of emptiness, what your void is really telling you. That feeling of emptiness, the void that sometimes feels like it might swallow you whole, isn't what we've been conditioned to believe. Our consumer culture interprets emptiness as lack, as deficiency, as a problem to be solved with more achievement, more possessions, more experiences, more connections. But what if this interpretation fundamentally misunderstands the nature and purpose of emptiness? Ancient wisdom traditions offer a radically different perspective. In Buddhism, the concept of shunyata, or emptiness, isn't negative but liberating. It represents the spaciousness from which all possibilities arise. Taoist philosophy speaks of emptiness as the essential quality that gives things their usefulness. We shape clay into a pot, but it is the emptiness inside that holds whatever we want, as Lao Tzu observed. Modern psychology echoes these insights. Developmental psychologists note that periods of emptiness often emerge during major life transitions, what anthropologists call liminal spaces, where old identities dissolve before new ones form. This emptiness isn't pathological but developmental, marking the space between who you were and who you're becoming. Neuroscience offers fascinating support for this perspective. Research shows that when people enter meditative states characterized by decreased self-referential thinking, experienced subjectively as emptiness, brain activity shifts from the default mode network to more integrative neural patterns associated with insight and creative breakthroughs. What feels subjectively like emptiness may actually be the brain reorganizing itself at deeper levels. Perhaps most profound is what depth psychology suggests, that the emptiness we feel is often the psyche's way of creating space for authenticity. When we've been living according to external expectations, pursuing goals that don't reflect our deeper values, or suppressing important aspects of ourselves, emptiness emerges as a signal that we've strayed from our true path. It's not emptiness as absence, but emptiness as invitation. The psyche clearing away what isn't truly yours to make room for what is. The void as crucible. How emptiness transforms us. Throughout history, spiritual seekers and psychological pioneers have recognized that transformation rarely happens in comfortable spaces. It occurs in the crucible of emptiness, when familiar identities, beliefs, and attachments fall away, creating the necessary space for something new to emerge. Christian mystical tradition speaks of the cloud of unknowing and the dark night of the soul, periods where previous religious certainties and spiritual experiences seem to evaporate, leaving only emptiness. Yet these passages aren't punishments, but purifications, clearing away limited concepts of God and self to allow for more direct encounter with the divine. Jungian psychology describes similar processes through the concept of psychological death and rebirth. When conscious identity structures collapse, often experienced as depression, meaninglessness, or emptiness, the psyche is actually creating space for broader aspects of the self to emerge from the unconscious. What feels like disintegration is actually the precursor to a more authentic integration. Research in post-traumatic growth offers empirical support for these traditional insights. Studies show that individuals who experience profound loss or trauma, events that create an emptiness where something or someone important once was, often report not just recovery but transformation. They develop greater appreciation for life, more meaningful relationships, increased personal strength, new possibilities, and spiritual deepening. But crucially, This growth emerges from fully encountering the emptiness rather than avoiding it. What makes the void so transformative is precisely what makes it uncomfortable. It strips away our habitual strategies for maintaining a coherent sense of self. Without the familiar identities, roles, and activities that usually define us, we're forced to confront more fundamental questions. Who am I beyond my achievements? What truly matters to me? What is my authentic purpose? These questions rarely arise when we're comfortably occupied, but they become unavoidable in the emptiness, and their answers become the foundation for genuine rebirth. Resistance to emptiness. Why we run from the void. Despite its transformative potential, emptiness remains one of our most feared experiences. We go to extraordinary lengths to avoid it, filling our calendars with ceaseless activity, our homes with endless possessions, our minds with constant stimulation, and our bodies with various substances. But why do we find emptiness so threatening? At a basic neurobiological level, emptiness often triggers the brain's threat detection systems. When we lack clear direction or purpose, the amygdala, our brain's alarm system, can interpret this uncertainty as potential danger, triggering anxiety and avoidance behaviors. Research in affective neuroscience shows that ambiguous situations often generate stronger threat responses than clear negative ones, explaining why emptiness can feel more disturbing than straightforward challenges. Culturally, we've inherited powerful messages about emptiness as failure. Productivity culture equates empty time with wasted time. Consumer capitalism interprets empty spaces as opportunities for acquisition. Social media portrays empty social calendars as signs of inadequacy. These messages compound our natural discomfort with uncertainty, creating multi-layered resistance to emptiness. Psychologically, emptiness threatens our defense mechanisms, the strategies we've developed to maintain a sense of control and coherence. When familiar distractions and identities fall away, we're forced to encounter painful emotions, unresolved traumas, or existential questions we've been avoiding. What we're really resisting isn't emptiness itself, but what it might reveal about ourselves. Perhaps most fundamentally, emptiness confronts us with impermanence and mortality. Empty spaces remind us that nothing lasts forever, not relationships, achievements, possessions, or even our own lives. In Buddhist terms, emptiness reveals anicca, impermanence, and challenges our desperate attempts to establish permanent security in an inherently impermanent existence. Understanding these layers of resistance helps explain why we frantically try to fill the void rather than allowing it to become generative space. Yet paradoxically, our attempts to escape emptiness only postpone the very transformation it offers. Each distraction, achievement, or relationship pursued primarily to avoid the void eventually collapses back into emptiness, creating cycles of temporary fulfillment and inevitable disillusionment until we finally learn to work with emptiness rather than against it. The art of emptying, creating space for rebirth. If emptiness contains transformative potential, how might we actively cultivate it rather than merely enduring it when it arrives uninvited? Across contemplative traditions, we find practices specifically designed to create sacred emptiness. Intentional clearing that makes space for authentic rebirth. Meditation represents perhaps the most direct practice of emptying. By temporarily setting aside our usual preoccupations with past and future, with planning and evaluating, meditation creates intervals of mental spaciousness where new insights and perspectives can emerge. Research in contemplative neuroscience confirms that regular meditation reduces activity in brain networks associated with rumination and self-referential thinking, while enhancing neural integration and cognitive flexibility. Simplicity practices, from decluttering physical spaces to digital detoxes to consumption fasts, create external emptiness that often catalyzes internal clarity. Marie Kondo's wildly popular methods aren't merely about organization, but about intentionally creating space by removing what doesn't spark joy, what doesn't align with authentic values and purposes. These practices recognize that outer and inner space are intimately connected. Retreat traditions across cultures institutionalize the practice of emptying by temporarily withdrawing from ordinary activities and responsibilities. Whether through religious retreat, secular sabbaticals, or wilderness solitude, these practices create containers where habitual patterns can be suspended, creating space for deeper questions and emergent insights. Psychological emptying occurs through practices like journaling, dream work, art making, or therapy, approaches that create space for unconscious material to emerge into awareness. These practices don't add new information, but rather create receptive space where previously unacknowledged aspects of ourselves can be recognized and integrated. What unites these diverse approaches is their recognition that emptiness must be actively protected against our habitual tendency to fill it prematurely. True rebirth emerges not from frantically seeking new content for our lives, but from creating and maintaining fertile emptiness, where authentic content can spontaneously arise. As the Zen saying goes, empty your cup so that it may be filled. Signs of rebirth. When the void begins to bloom. How do we recognize when emptiness is beginning to fulfill its purpose? When the void is becoming the birthplace of something new. While each person's experience of rebirth is unique, certain patterns typically emerge as emptiness transforms from desolation to fertility. One early sign is a shift in the quality of emptiness itself. What initially felt like barren absence gradually takes on a pregnant quality, a sense of expectancy or potential. This shift often occurs subtly, appearing first as brief moments of curiosity or interest punctuating longer periods of emptiness. Though the void remains, it no longer feels like pure negation. Another indicator involves changing dream patterns. As rebirth approaches, dreams often feature images of pregnancy, birth, new buildings under construction, or unexplored rooms discovered in familiar houses. These symbolic representations signal that the unconscious mind is actively generating new possibilities, even before they're consciously recognized. Synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that seem to respond to inner questions or needs, typically multiply during periods of imminent rebirth. Books fall open to precisely relevant passages. Conversations with strangers provide unexpected guidance. Opportunities aligned with emerging interests appear without deliberate seeking. These events suggest that when we create internal space, the external world often responds with surprising attunement. Physically, approaching rebirth often manifests as changing energy patterns. The lethargy that frequently accompanies early emptiness gradually gives way to sporadic bursts of unusual vitality. Sleep patterns may temporarily disrupt as the psyche processes accelerated change. Appetite might fluctuate as the body adjusts to shifting psychological states. Perhaps most significantly, values and interests begin realigning in ways that feel simultaneously surprising and deeply familiar. Activities that once seemed important lose their appeal, while previously overlooked areas suddenly generate curiosity and engagement. These shifts rarely arrive as dramatic revelations, but rather as quiet recognitions. Oh, this matters to me now, that gradually coalesce into new direction. What makes these signs particularly valuable is their emergent quality. Unlike goals consciously pursued to fill emptiness, these indicators arise spontaneously from the empty space itself, evidence that something authentic is being born through you rather than manufactured by you. Integrating the void, the journey to authentic living. The true art of living with emptiness isn't just about recognizing it or even moving through it, but integrating it as an essential part of human existence. When we understand that emptiness isn't an aberrant state to be avoided but a necessary component of the growth cycle, we can develop a radically different relationship with these seemingly unproductive periods. Contemplative traditions have long taught that enlightenment isn't about eliminating emptiness, but developing the capacity to dwell comfortably in both fullness and emptiness. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh often spoke about interbeing, the recognition that form and emptiness coexist and define each other, just as a wave cannot exist separate from the ocean. Contemporary psychology echoes this wisdom through the concept of tolerance for ambiguity, the ability to remain comfortable with the uncertain, the undefined, and the incomplete. Research shows that individuals with high tolerance for ambiguity demonstrate greater creativity, resilience, and psychological well-being. What these people have cultivated isn't the elimination of emptiness, but a transformed relationship with it. They recognize that creativity requires fallow periods, that clarity emerges from confusion, and that authentic direction can only arise from temporary directionlessness. In essence, they've learned to trust the cycle of emptiness and fullness rather than clinging desperately to only one phase of this natural rhythm. This integration happens not through intellectual understanding alone, but through lived experience. Each time we consciously allow ourselves to remain in emptiness without premature resolution, each time we resist the cultural imperative to fill every moment with activity, achievement, or acquisition, we build the psychological muscles needed for this integration. We learn experientially that emptiness doesn't destroy us, but transforms us. The ecological wisdom of emptiness. Our disconnection from emptiness reflects our broader disconnection from natural cycles. Indigenous wisdom traditions have long recognized that all living systems require periods of dormancy and apparent emptiness. The fallow field, the winter forest, the chrysalis. These seemingly inactive states are actually where profound reorganization occurs beneath the surface. Modern ecology confirms this ancient understanding. Research in forest ecology, for example, reveals that what appears to be the emptiness of winter is actually a period of vital rest and preparation. Without winter dormancy, trees cannot produce spring growth. Without periods of rest, soil cannot regenerate its fertility. What appears as absence is actually potent presence operating in a different mode. Our human lives follow similar patterns, yet we've created systems that deny this ecological wisdom. We've built economies that demand constant productivity, technologies that enable perpetual stimulation, and social expectations that reward constant visibility. These systems treat rest, reflection, and emptiness as inefficiencies to be eliminated rather than as essential aspects of the human experience. This chronic avoidance of emptiness manifests not just in individual distress, but in collective crises, burnout epidemics, attention disorders, environmental degradation. These seemingly disparate problems share a common root in our inability to honor necessary cycles of emptiness. By denying the void in our personal lives, we create voids in our collective sustainability. Learning to integrate emptiness thus becomes not just a personal psychological project, but an ecological necessity. As we develop healthier relationships with emptiness in our inner lives, we naturally begin questioning the systems that demand constant production and consumption. We start creating environments, physical, social, and economic, that honor the necessary rhythms of activity and rest, fullness, and emptiness. Beyond arrival, emptiness as ongoing practice. Perhaps the most profound shift occurs when we recognize that the integration of emptiness isn't a destination, but a continuous practice. There's no final state where we've mastered emptiness once and for all. Instead, each new phase of life, each new challenge, each new transition brings fresh encounters with the void. What changes through practice isn't the presence of emptiness, but our relationship to it. The emptiness that once triggered panic gradually becomes recognizable as a familiar companion in the creative process. The void that once seemed to threaten identity becomes appreciated as the space where identity can evolve. The uncertainty that once provoked frantic activity becomes welcomed as the precondition for authentic choice. This ongoing practice transforms our very conception of fulfillment. Rather than seeking a life perpetually filled with achievement, stimulation, or even meaning, we come to value the rhythmic alternation between fullness and emptiness. We recognize that a truly rich life contains fallow periods, questioning periods, directionless periods, not as failures of living, but as essential components of depth. The sages of many traditions speak of this as the culmination of wisdom, not the transcendence of emptiness, but the capacity to dance with it, to recognize it as not separate from fullness, but interdependent with it. In the words of the Heart Sutra, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. This isn't abstract philosophy, but the lived reality of those who have learned to integrate the void. As we face accelerating change and uncertainty in our personal and collective lives, this wisdom becomes increasingly vital. The capacity to remain grounded in emptiness, to allow old forms to dissolve without prematurely grasping at new ones, may be the most essential skill for navigating our complex world. Not because emptiness itself is the goal, but because it creates the space from which authentic responses can emerge. In the end, emptiness reveals itself not as absence, but as spaciousness, the fundamental openness that allows life to continuously renew itself through us. When we fully embrace this understanding, the void is no longer something we endure, but something we cherish, the fertile darkness from which all creativity, authenticity, and transformation are born.